I wanted to talk to you guys about the accusations of Israel blocking aid to Gaza. So there have been accusations being thrown at the Israelis for the entirety of the war of them not providing the Palestinians with enough humanitarian aid. Of course, it doesn't just fall at the feet of the Israeli government. It somewhat falls at the feet of the Egyptian government. It also falls at the feet of a few other governments, but the Israeli government is the one engaging in the military operations, and aid that is trying to be transported into Gaza is being blocked on the Israeli side. Now, we can look at the UN data to see that 30% of aid that was going into Gaza has been blocked, as in there's a decrease in aid that's being sent over into Gaza. I don't think it's just because of it's being blocked, but there's a real reduction in the amount of aid that's getting into Gaza of 30%. And that's from the UN. You can go take those numbers up with the UN. So there's a real measurable impact in a reduction of aid when the amount of aid should not be reduced. The amount of aid should be expanded. There are children in hospitals that are dying of malnutrition. There are families that are unable to feed themselves. Over 500,000 people are on the brink of famine. And with 500,000 people, 25% of those in the Gaza Strip on the brink of famine, you will have more people dying of malnutrition, especially if the amount of aid getting into Gaza does not increase, which is the direction the aid needs to go, but is decreasing by 30%. Now, why is the aid not getting in? Now, this has been a problem since the start. There's been a problem with the Egyptians not wanting to open their border because they don't want Palestinians to leave. They say because they don't want the Palestinians to be thrown off their land, but it almost certainly partially has to do with political reasons, with the Egyptian government not liking the Muslim Brotherhood because they overthrew a Muslim Brotherhood government, and the Muslim Brotherhood has ties to Hamas. And there's also the reason that the Egyptian economy is in a real rough spot, especially with the chaos in the Red Sea, but it's been in a rough spot for a while due to lavish spending by the Egyptian government, big mega projects that never really come to fruition, this new mega capital, not to mention, point is the Egyptian economy, I don't want to get into specifics, the Egyptian economy is not in a great space right now, and them thinking about having to financially support those people has held them back from allowing them to evacuate, and aid has had trouble going from across the Egyptian border into the Strip. On the Israeli side, there's also been a problem of aid trucks trying to get in and either being blocked because of the goods that are in the aid truck. Now, you can see that there is this report that was released by CNN talking about the different items that were trying to get into the Gaza Strip along aid trucks that were blocked by the Israeli government. They have a list of items that are denied entry into Gaza that CNN has reviewed. And let me read you some of the items that they have blocked from going into Gaza. You can go read this article yourself. It's by, well, I'm not going to read all these names, but it's by a bunch of people here. It's CNN, aesthetics, crutches, dates, inside Israel's ghost list of items arbitrarily detained entry into Gaza. Let's read a few of these products. One second. Let's see. Where is it? Here it is. CNN has reviewed documents compiled by major participants in the humanitarian operation that list the items most frequently rejected by the Israelis. These include anesthetics, anesthesia machines, oxygen cylinders, ventilators, and water filtration systems. Other items that have ended up in the bureaucratic limbo include dates, sleeping bags, medicines to treat cancer, water purification tablets, and maternity kits. Because we know all the people who stormed the south of Israel with maternity kits. Anyway, the reason Israel is blocking these products, even though they all seem humanitarian in nature and like products you would need if 2 million people were under siege, including many with medical issues and many who needed things like water or sleeping bags, their argument is that these products could be repurposed into weapons. I think it's talked about later in the article. Let's see if we can read it. In a statement provided to CNN after the publication of this report, COGAT said that it had facilitated the admission of humanitarian aid to Gaza since the beginning of the war. It said that dual-use products for humanitarian infrastructure are not sweepingly denied entry, but were subject to security evaluation to prevent them from being used by Hamas, those maternity kits, from being used by Hamas. In relation to the allegations that specific goods were denied entry, it said that these were subject to security checks to ensure that they are not used for terrorist purposes. They described the testimony given to CNN as false accusations and criticized the decision to go public with these claims. Israel assists, encourages, and facilitates the entry of humanitarian aid for residents of the Gaza Strip and for medical and other infrastructure into the Strip. Now, if you were to ask the Israelis why there's a 30% decrease in the aid getting through, the reason they would give, I mean, outside of these security reasons as to why they had to block the maternity kits, would be that the trucks, the aid convoys, no longer want to go and make these runs into northern Gaza, where there's still 300,000 people that are at the brink, not at the brink, are already at a humanitarian catastrophe. Now, these trucks have had real issues, as in there's at least one report of one truck driver being severely beaten. We, of course, saw the footage of 8 trucks being swarmed due to the terrible state of the humanitarian situation inside Gaza and people being desperate for food. And so there is a certain amount of hesitancy by aid organizations to make these same routes because they don't feel that these routes are safe. But I will also throw out there that since it is, the Israeli government that is now occupying this land, it is their responsibility to make it so that there is a safe passage for aid trucks into Gaza and that they're not, say, fired upon or not able to get aid, not able to get supplies because the area is just descended into lawlessness or it's just complete chaos. Now, this article that has testimony of people saying that the chaos is deliberate, but of course we don't have any leaked documents proving anything like that. And as of right now, that is just testimony. But that's not the only way aid is being blocked. It is not only being blocked due to a lack of safety. It is not only being blocked due to maternity kits being used as bombs. It's not being blocked just for these reasons. It's also, now, by the way, I'm not saying that an air tank can't be used for destructive purposes, but when you go through the full list, you do start to raise eyebrows. They are also being blocked by just protesters. As in protesters, and this isn't just being reported by some rinky-dink outlets. Amnesty International, which I've had problems with the past, which I understand why people have had problems with some of the reports in the past, are putting out reports saying that Israel is defying the ICJ ruling to prevent genocide by not allowing adequate humanitarian aid to reach Gaza. We've got PBS talking about Human Rights Watch saying Israel is violating an order from the top UN by blocking aid to Gazans. But there are straight up protesters on the border, far-right protesters, including radical settlers who want to bring settlements back to Gaza, blocking aid, and they've got barbecues, bouncy castles. They're throwing parties on the border as they block food from going into Gaza. And when you look at these protesters and their demands, what are they demanding? They're demanding the release of any and all hostages before aid gets into the Strip. So the idea is, if their children keep starving to death, then maybe they'll let go of the prisoners. And once they let go of the prisoners, then we will provide the aid that will stop their children from starving to death. That's the tactic. Now, let me be clear. There is a responsibility to provide these people with aid. There's a responsibility of the international community and the responsibility of Israel as the occupying power to make sure aid is properly distributed, make sure that at the very least that the aid trucks are safe as they enter northern Gaza and try to distribute food to the 300,000 there, or trying to distribute food to the south. There has to be locations that people know are safe, that they can go to pick up aid, and there has to be some order so it isn't chaotic and we have either truck drivers getting beaten to death or incidents. I don't even want to call it an incident. I don't like that word. Where we have horrific displays of violence where over 100,000 people possibly get killed by a combination of trampling and Israeli gunfire. These protesters, to be blunt from my position, should be taken and thrown off the border region. That's my opinion. Yeah, I mean, I think about all those hoses that were used against like the most horrific in the most horrific way against protesters in the United States. I think all the times protesters have been horribly beaten and abused. And I don't think any of these people deserve to have horrific violence thrown against them. But if we could just show 1/1,000,000th of the passion that we display when somebody stops the road into DC and makes somebody late for work, which I can understand is an asshole thing to do. If we could show 1/100th of that outrage towards the people blocking food from the mouths of children. Remember, 50% of the civilian population in Gaza is 14 or under. They don't control, that 14-year-old does not control whether their hostages get released. If those children starve to death, it will be not because of, if those children starve to death, it won't make it so the Hamas people also starve to death. The Hamas people have food. They have food, they have water, they have supplies that they've been storing. The people that would end up dying would be the civilians. So I just don't see what this accomplishes. They should crack down on these protests, and they need to establish points which people know that they can gather for aid, and they need to establish some sort of order for a steady flow of aid into northern Gaza and into territories where people are running low on anesthetics, where people are, where C-sections are being performed without anesthesia, without anesthetics, which is an extremely painful experience for people who are dying of malnutrition. The supply needs to get through, or the death toll is only going to rapidly increase. The longer we put this off, the more people that will die. I also want to throw out there something that Matt Duss brought up. And Matt Duss, to be clear, was a former foreign policy advisor to Senator Bernie Sanders. We've had him on the show before. He tweeted out Section 6201 of the Foreign Assistance Act, which the Foreign Assistance Act regulates who and how we can provide, who to and how can we provide foreign assistance to allies. And Section 6201 of the Foreign Assistance Act states, no assistance shall be furnished to any country when it is made known to the president that the government of such country prohibits or otherwise restricts directly or indirectly the transport or delivery of U.S. humanitarian assistance. I thought this was a really interesting citing by Matt Duss, and he's not the only person who cited it, and we're going to talk about that in a second, but I wanted to show you Miller being confronted over this by a journalist.
Come to the humanitarian situation, which you described as unacceptable and unsustainable. Your colleague John Kirby yesterday in a briefing talked about. I was asked about what's preventing more aid from getting into Gaza. Talked about there have been some inorganic obstacles thrown up. Inorganic obstacles thrown up in some cases by members of the Israeli cabinet that have made it hard to get aid in. What are those obstacles like?
That's another thing I do need to talk about. It isn't just protesters. There are members of the Israeli government that also want to either slow down aid or just don't want aid to be sent altogether.
What are the obstacles specifically that he's talking about there?
So I'm not going to, I will let him speak to what he was speaking to, but I will say some of the obstacles that we have seen from the Israeli political establishment. You have seen ministers in the Israeli government block the release of flour from the port at Ashdod. You have seen ministers of the Israeli government supporting protests that blocked aid from going in to Kerem Shalom. So all of those things are obstacles coming from ministers inside the Israeli government that we have called out, that we have said are unacceptable, and that we have said should end.
Does that include the refusal to open the Erez crossing or another crossing in the north?
We want to see another crossing open, and it's something we're engaged with quite directly with the Israeli government, and that includes in the conversation that the Secretary had with Minister Gantz today. He was quite direct and quite frank about the seriousness of the situation on the ground and the fact that it is incumbent on everyone involved to do more to get aid in urgently, as soon as possible.
I want to ask about how this relates to the Foreign Assistance Act, 1961, I believe. It has a part of the act that basically says no assistance shall be furnished to countries that prohibit or otherwise restrict the transport delivery of U.S. humanitarian assistance. Is Israel in breach of that?
This is a great question by this journalist, by the way. Got to give him credit for that.
I will have to go back and look at the language of that text. It's not something that I've spent a lot of time looking at, but we are always engaged with Israel, as we are with all countries, about their need to fulfill all U.S. statutory requirements, and we have not made an assessment that Israel is in breach of any such statutory requirements at this time.
Is this building working on an assessment that would determine whether that's happening?
I don't have any such assessment to read out at this time.
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so, 1 second. This isn't where it ended, though. In fact, I thought this is where it would end. But it didn't end here. A senator took this, found this information out, and decided to bring it to the House floor. Not the House of Representatives, but, you know, Congress. And bring it up while talking on the floor in the specific section of the Foreign Assistance Act. And by the way, can I just mention, he's a Maryland senator. Not just any Maryland senator, but my Maryland senator.
Unless and until the Netanyahu government allows more relief into Gaza, the President Biden needs to invoke Section 620I of the Foreign Assistance Act. Madam President, here's the exact language of that section of the Foreign Assistance Act. Quote, no assistance shall be furnished under this chapter of the Arms Export Control Act to any country when it is made known to the President that the government of such country prohibits or otherwise restricts, directly or indirectly, the transport or delivery of United States.
Dylan, wouldn't they both be my senator? Yeah. So he's mine, and so is the other one.
Humanitarian assistance. Now, about 3 weeks ago, I asked senior State Department officials to tell me why this law, Section 628I of the Foreign Assistance Act, has not...
Now, I will say, I'm sorry to interrupt him, I particularly claim Ben Hollen, not because I strongly ideologically necessarily agree with him on everything, but because his office is particularly responsive to constituents in my experience, and he has also helped out my family while we were dealing with the University of Maryland and some really just, I would say, janky charges they were putting on me for stuff. They were trying to charge me as an out-of-state student, and he kind of helped us with that. And he's not just, and there's a lot of personal stories, and I know from other people where the Hollen office has helped people out. And that right there, whether you guys realize it or not, is a huge reason why senators and congresspeople take their seat. And you'll go to districts where senators or congresspeople are hated everywhere else in the country, and they'll be like, well, that guy made a bridge right there, and that bridge is to get to the gas station that I have to use. Yeah, I like him. I like the bridge. And then boom, you're done. There's no you can be like, well, did you know he said this about he's the bridge guy. He sees the bridge in his real life. That's more than any other senator has done for them ever. So that's how you win people over forever. I remember I was talking to a family member, and them getting to meet a senator's dog and their dog being nice, and then them remembering their name later got them to vote for him. So those types of relationships is a big way on how congressmen and senators keep their position. This is also why I would suggest that you build up, and this is why I'm not a big fan of Cenk Uygur style campaigns for office. I'm not saying it's impossible, but a best way to get people into politics, in my opinion, is to climb the ladder. It's to start state, maybe even county, maybe even city, and then build your way up, getting to know people, so people get to trust you, get to know you, you get to know the community better, you get to know the people you represent better, they get to know you better, and then 10 years down the line, they're voting for you for something you did for them 12 years ago when they had some problem with the local police force. It's also, I think, better at making more experienced statesmen. Not statesmen necessarily, but, more experienced politicians.
Has not been applied. Tell me how it's not the case that Prime Minister Netanyahu is not restricting directly or indirectly the transport or delivery of United States humanitarian assistance when we have the humanitarian horror show that I just mentioned. Well, I haven't gotten an answer to the question I posed about 3 weeks ago. And the answer, Madam President, is there is no good answer to that question.
I hope more senators and more congressmen. So I got to compliment Senator Van Hollen for doing this. And I hope other senators and other congressmen bring up this section of the Foreign Assistance Act, and they hammer on it, and they bring it up, and they bring it up again and again and again. And even if they can't end up getting that part of the act cited to actually stop the handing over of military assistance, which I still doubt that could happen. I'm not saying it's impossible to happen, but I doubt the government is going to move to do that. I hope that the public attention on it will make the Israeli government act. And if not, then there has to be some push for them to actually try to go through actuality. You need to make the threat credible. And the only way they make the threat credible of something like this happening is to get louder and louder and louder about it. So this is a good move by Senator Chris Van Hollen. I hope others also make a lot of noise about this in the Senate and in the House.